And recognition of that sacrifice.
So this was on the
fact that they were all...
The letter had been sealed for years, tucked quietly among the Queen's most private effects. No one expected it to surface now, and certainly not in Catherine's hands. But when the contents became known, Camilla's family reacted in a way the palace could no longer ignore. The quiet discovery at Windsor. The morning it began was unusually still, even by Windsor standards. Early winter light pressed softly against the tall windows of the castle's private archival wing, casting pale reflections across the polished floors. Inside those quiet rooms, where the late Queen's personal effects were being carefully catalogued, the work proceeded with the kind of reverence normally reserved for history itself. Months had passed since the solemn days that followed Queen Elizabeth's funeral, yet the task of organizing her personal belongings remained ongoing. Not everything could be processed immediately. Certain items had been sealed, catalogued, and stored under strict instruction, awaiting the proper moment for review. On that particular morning, a small team of trusted archivists gathered around a long oak table that had been used for decades to examine royal correspondence. The files before them were part of a final collection, documents and private items that had been placed aside by the Queen herself during the last years of her life. Each envelope was labeled in her unmistakable handwriting. Some were addressed to institutions, others carried instructions for senior staff, but one item stood out immediately. It was a slender ivory envelope, its edges slightly worn with age, tied with a thin ribbon that had yellowed over time. Across the front, written in the steady, unmistakable script of Queen Elizabeth, were just a few simple words. For Catherine. The archivists paused. In a building where discretion had been a way of life for generations, even the smallest detail could carry enormous significance. The presence of Catherine's name on a sealed envelope among the Queen's most private effects was not something to be treated casually. Protocol required that any document personally designated by the monarch be verified and recorded before being opened. A senior royal secretary was quietly summoned to oversee the process. Within minutes, the atmosphere inside the room shifted. There was no urgency, no raised voices. Windsor Castle had seen centuries of change, and its staff were accustomed to history unfolding in quiet moments rather than dramatic scenes. Yet everyone present understood that they were witnessing something unusual. The envelope had clearly been prepared years earlier. The paper itself was of the heavy, cream-colored stationery the Queen had favored throughout much of her reign, a style that had become almost synonymous with royal correspondence since the late 1980s. Carefully, the ribbon was untied. The room remained silent as the envelope was opened. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a smaller velvet pouch. The secretary unfolded the letter first. It was handwritten, not typed, not dictated, but written personally by Queen Elizabeth in the same steady hand that had once signed thousands of state documents, letters to world leaders, and messages to her people during moments of national importance. This note, however, was different. It was brief, personal, and unmistakably meant for one person alone. The words were quiet, reflective, written with the calm clarity that had defined the Queen's public life for more than 70 years. She spoke of duty, of patience, of the quiet strength required to carry the weight of tradition while allowing the monarchy to move forward. Then came the final line. A simple explanation for why the enclosed gift had been reserved specifically for Catherine. It was not about rank, it was not about the ceremony, it was about trust. The secretary read the letter once more, before carefully placing it back on the table. No one spoke for several seconds. The velvet pouch remained unopened. Protocol again required careful documentation before its contents could be examined, but the presence of such an item, sealed together with a personal letter, suggested that the Queen had intended the two to remain inseparable. A decision was made almost immediately. Catherine would need to be informed. Yet even that step required care. The Princess of Wales had always maintained a respectful distance from the internal mechanics of royal administration. She rarely involved herself in matters that belonged to palace staff or archivists. But this was different. This was a message left by the late Queen herself. Within the hour, a discreet call was placed to Kensington Palace. The request was simple. If the Princess of Wales had time later that afternoon, there was a matter related to the Queen's personal archives that required her attention. No further details were provided over the phone. At Windsor, the envelope, the letter, and the small velvet pouch were placed inside a protective case and secured in the archival office's private cabinet. Staff returned to their work, though the quiet energy in the room had unmistakably shifted. Even among professionals accustomed to royal history, the sense lingered that something deeply personal had just surfaced. Late that afternoon, Catherine arrived at Windsor. She came without ceremony, entering through a private side entrance that had long been used for discreet visits. There were no photographers, no announcements, and no formal procession. Just a quiet walk down familiar corridors. The Princess of Wales had spent many hours in Windsor during the later years of the Queen's life. It had been one of the places where their relationship deepened, not through grand occasions, but through ordinary conversations, shared walks, and moments of observation that never appeared in public records. When Catherine entered the archival room, the atmosphere remained respectful but calm. The secretary greeted her warmly and explained in careful terms that something had been discovered among the Queen's final sealed effects. The protective case was placed gently on the table. Catherine listened without interrupting as the secretary described the envelope, the handwritten letter, and the instructions left by the Queen. Then the case was opened. For a brief moment, Catherine simply looked at the envelope bearing her name. The handwriting was instantly familiar. For more than a decade, she had received occasional personal notes from the Queen, short messages after engagements, handwritten acknowledgments of family milestones, small expressions of encouragement that never reached the public eye. But this letter was different. It had been written long before the Queen's passing, and it had been deliberately set aside to be delivered only after that moment arrived. Slowly, Catherine reached forward and lifted the envelope. The room remained silent as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the letter. No one attempted to read it again. This time, the words belonged to her alone. But even before Catherine reached the final line, it became clear to everyone present that the Queen had left something far more meaningful than a simple keepsake. She had left a message, and a gift that carried a significance no one in the room could yet fully understand. The meaning behind the Queen's final gift. The room remained quiet long after Catherine finished reading the letter. For a few seconds, she simply held the paper in both hands, her expression composed but thoughtful. Those who had worked inside royal households for years recognized the moment instantly. This was not the reaction of someone surprised by luxury or dazzled by privilege. It was the reaction of someone who understood the deeper meaning behind what had just been entrusted to her. The Queen had never been a woman who gave gifts casually. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth's gestures were often quiet, almost understated. Yet within the world of royal tradition, those quiet gestures could carry enormous significance. A brooch worn at the right moment, a handwritten note sent after a difficult engagement, a small object passed quietly from one generation to the next. These were the kinds of signals she preferred. They rarely made headlines, but within the palace, their meaning was unmistakable. The letter Catherine held in her hands reflected that same philosophy. It was not long, and it contained no elaborate language, but every line had been written deliberately. The Queen spoke of patience. She spoke of the importance of observation before action. She spoke of the quiet discipline required to serve the crown without allowing the role to consume the person behind it. For Catherine, those words carried particular weight. Since joining the royal family more than a decade earlier, she had often taken the same approach, learning slowly, listening carefully, and avoiding the kinds of public missteps that had complicated royal life for others. Many palace staff had noticed it, and it seemed the Queen had noticed it too. The secretary, still standing beside the table, gently turned his attention toward the small velvet pouch that had been discovered with the letter. Until Catherine finished reading the message, no one had attempted to open it. Now, with a quiet nod from the Princess of Wales, the pouch was placed in front of her. Its fabric was deep burgundy, soft with age, tied at the top with a thin gold cord. There was nothing ostentatious about it. In fact, at first glance, it looked surprisingly simple for something that had been preserved among the Queen's most personal possessions. But appearances could be deceiving. Catherine carefully loosened the cord and opened the pouch. Inside was a small object, wrapped in a square of cream silk. The silk itself carried the faint scent of the lavender sachets that had long been used in Windsor's private wardrobes, a detail that instantly suggested the item had been stored among the Queen's personal effects for many years. When Catherine unfolded the silk, the object inside became visible. Those present in the room immediately recognized it, not because it was particularly large or extravagant, but because of what it represented. It was one of Queen Elizabeth's most personal keepsakes, an item that had quietly accompanied her through decades of public life. The Queen had rarely spoken about it, It had never been part of any official royal collection, and unlike the crown jewels or other historic treasures, it had not been catalogued for ceremonial use. It was simply something the Queen had chosen to keep close. At certain private moments, long-serving aides had noticed it resting on her desk at Windsor or Sandringham. Occasionally it appeared in photographs taken during informal family gatherings. But it had never been displayed publicly, never loaned for exhibitions, and never mentioned in royal inventories, until now. Catherine held the object carefully, examining it with quiet concentration. The secretary watched respectfully, understanding that the moment belonged entirely to her. The letter had explained everything. Queen Elizabeth had written that the item was not intended to represent rank or authority. It was not meant to become part of the Princess of Wales's public appearances. In fact, the Queen had specifically suggested that it remain private. Instead, the gift was meant to serve as a reminder of the responsibilities that came with royal life. A reminder that the monarchy's strength had always depended less on spectacle and more on steadiness. And perhaps most importantly, a reminder that the crown itself had always been larger than any single individual who wore it. Catherine read that final section of the letter once more before carefully placing it back into the envelope. For a moment she remained silent, holding the Queen's keepsake in her hands. Outside the windows of Windsor Castle, the winter afternoon had begun to fade into evening. The sky over the Thames Valley carried the soft gray light that often settled across the countryside at that time of year. Inside the archival room, however, the moment felt almost suspended. Those who had served the Queen for decades often described her as a master of quiet preparation. She rarely announced her intentions openly, preferring instead to leave subtle signals that would only become clear later. This gift appeared to be one of those signals, not a public declaration, not an official decree, but a deeply personal gesture. For Catherine, the meaning was unmistakable. It was not simply a keepsake from a beloved grandmother figure. It was a message about the future. And in the days that followed, as news of the Queen's private gesture slowly began to ripple beyond Windsor's walls, that message would begin to stir reactions no one inside the archival room had anticipated. Word reaches Camilla's circle. News inside royal circles rarely travels in a straight line. It moves quietly, carried in fragments of conversation, hinted at in half-finished sentences, passed carefully between people who understand exactly how much should and should not be said aloud. For the first few days after the discovery at Windsor, the Queen's final gift to Catherine remained almost entirely contained within the palace walls. The archivists returned to their duties. The letter was secured in the same protective case where it had first been examined, and Catherine herself spoke about it only to a very small circle of trusted family members. But royal households are complex environments. B-staff move between residences. Advisors maintain connections that stretch across multiple offices. Family friends who have known each other for decades often hear small pieces of information long before those details appear anywhere else. And so, slowly, word began to travel. Not publicly, not through official channels, but through the kind of quiet network that has always existed around the monarchy. The first whispers surfaced within the extended social circle connected to Camilla's family. These were people who had known her long before she became queen. Individuals who had watched her life unfold from the days when she was simply Camilla Parker Bowles, moving through the countryside social world of Wiltshire and Gloucestershire. Many of them had remained close to her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. Others had maintained friendships with cousins, relatives, and longtime acquaintances who still moved comfortably between royal events and private gatherings. It was within those overlapping circles that the story first appeared. At first, it sounded almost like speculation. Someone mentioned that the late Queen had left a private keepsake specifically for Catherine. Another person suggested it had been discovered among sealed papers at Windsor. A third added that it had been accompanied by a handwritten letter. Individually, each piece sounded harmless. Together, however, they carried a quiet implication. The idea that Queen Elizabeth had set aside something personal, something that had remained hidden until after her passing, and intended it specifically for Catherine. Within Camilla's extended family, reactions began to unfold in subtle but noticeable ways. For some relatives, the news simply sparked curiosity. They had spent years navigating the complicated dynamics that came with Camilla's position inside the royal family. The transition from longtime companion of the Prince of Wales to Queen Consort had been a journey filled with public scrutiny and private adjustment. Those closest to her understood how carefully that transition had been managed, but for others in the wider circle, the symbolism of the Queen's gesture raised quiet questions. Royal families have always placed great importance on signals, gestures that may appear small on the surface, but carry deeper meaning when viewed within the context of tradition. Why Catherine? Why now? And why had the late Queen chosen to make the gift known only after her death? In drawing rooms and private kitchens across parts of the English countryside, these questions began to circulate. No one accused Catherine of seeking attention. In fact, those who knew her reputation understood that she had never pursued recognition within the family hierarchy. But the story itself created a ripple effect. The late Queen had been known for maintaining careful balance among members of the royal household. During her lifetime, she had always taken great care to avoid gestures that might appear to elevate one person at the expense of another, which made this discovery feel unusual. Within Camilla's family circle, some interpreted the gift as a simple expression of affection. After all, the Queen had spent many years observing Catherine's role within the family. Their relationship had been marked by quiet respect and growing familiarity, yet others saw something more layered. They wondered whether the Queen's decision reflected a deeper confidence in Catherine's future role within the monarchy, a private signal about the direction the institution would take in the decades ahead. These conversations remained restrained, but they were not entirely invisible. Royal households are remarkably sensitive to shifts in atmosphere. Senior staff who had spent their careers navigating delicate family relationships could often sense when something had begun to stir beyond the palace gates. Within a matter of days, aides attached to Clarence House and Buckingham Palace began hearing fragments of the same story. Nothing dramatic, no confrontations. Just a subtle change in tone when certain names were mentioned. The Queen's final gift to Catherine had become a topic of quiet interest, and with that interest came interpretation. For some observers, the gesture seemed like a natural continuation of the late Queen's long-standing confidence in the Princess of Wales. Catherine had, after all, spent more than a decade preparing for the role she would eventually hold beside the future king. But within Camilla's extended family network, the symbolism carried additional weight. Many of them had spent years defending Camilla during the most difficult chapters of her public life. They remembered the fierce criticism that had once surrounded her relationship with Charles. They remembered the gradual process through which she had earned acceptance from the British public. Now, seeing the late Queen's personal keepsake placed in Catherine's hands stirred complicated emotions. Some felt protective, others simply felt surprised. And a few began to wonder whether the quiet balance that had held the royal household together for so long might be shifting in ways that were not yet fully visible. Back inside palace offices, those subtle ripples did not go entirely unnoticed. Experienced courtiers understood that when private gestures from the late Queen began circulating beyond Windsor's walls, interpretation was almost inevitable. The challenge now would be ensuring that those interpretations did not grow into something larger. Because in royal life, even the smallest symbol can sometimes awaken old fault lines that had once seemed safely buried. Old fault lines resurface. Within the royal household, history has a long memory. The corridors of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle have witnessed generations of shifting alliances, quiet reconciliations, and tensions that rarely appear in public but linger quietly beneath the surface. For those who work inside that world, understanding the past is often the only way to make sense of the present. And in the days after word of the Queen's final gift to Catherine began circulating through royal circles, some of those old memories began to stir. Not openly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way that institutional histories often re-emerge when an unexpected symbol appears. To understand why the discovery created such a ripple, one has to look back at the delicate balance that had formed within the royal family over the past 2 decades. Camilla's journey into the heart of the monarchy had never been simple. When she married Prince Charles in the spring of 2005, the atmosphere surrounding the union was cautious at best. Public opinion remained divided, and within parts of the royal establishment, there were lingering concerns about how her presence would reshape the internal dynamics of the institution. Queen Elizabeth, as always, had approached the matter with patience. Rather than forcing rapid acceptance, she allowed time to perform its quiet work. Camilla gradually took on charitable duties, appeared beside Charles at official engagements, and slowly established herself as a steady presence within royal life. For many years, the arrangement was held. By the time Charles became king, Camilla had long since earned a place within the family structure. Her role as queen consort was recognized publicly, and her relationship with senior members of the royal household appeared stable. But stability inside royal institutions often rests on layers of careful understanding. There were always unspoken boundaries. Camilla's position was respected, yet it existed alongside the clear knowledge that the monarchy's future would ultimately move through the next generation, through William and Catherine. The late queen had spent years reinforcing that balance. She offered Camilla visible support, even expressing her personal wish that Camilla be known as queen consort when the time came. At the same time, she quietly invested enormous attention in preparing William and Catherine for the responsibilities that lay ahead. For most observers, these parallel relationships never appeared contradictory. But when the Queen's private gift to Catherine surfaced after her passing, some within royal circles began to interpret the gesture as a final signal about where the monarchy's long-term focus truly rested. The symbolism was subtle. Yet, royal families have always been deeply attuned to symbolism. In private conversations among Camilla's extended relatives, the discovery began to take on a slightly sharper tone. What had initially sounded like curiosity now carried a hint of unease, not anger, but sensitivity. For decades, Camilla's family had watched her navigate one of the most complicated public journeys in modern royal history. They had seen the criticism she endured, the slow rebuilding of her reputation, and the careful diplomacy required to integrate her fully into the royal household. Many of them remained fiercely protective of her, and so the idea that Queen Elizabeth had quietly reserved a deeply personal keepsake for Catherine, without any similar gesture publicly known for Camilla, created an emotional undercurrent that was difficult to ignore. Within those circles, conversations grew more reflective. Some relatives wondered whether the Queen's decision had been made years earlier, long before Camilla's position in the monarchy had fully stabilized. Others speculated that the gift had been intended simply as encouragement for Catherine, rather than a comparison between two women whose roles in the royal family were very different. Still, the symbolism lingered, because inside royal life, even small gestures can carry echoes of deeper institutional thinking. Meanwhile, inside palace offices, experienced aides began to notice the subtle shift in atmosphere. There were no confrontations, no public statements, but certain conversations took on a slightly more careful tone. Advisors attached to different royal households began checking in with one another, ensuring that misunderstandings did not quietly expand into unnecessary tension. The monarchy has survived for centuries in part because of its ability to absorb small moments of discomfort without allowing them to grow into open divisions. And yet, beneath the calm exterior, the discovery of the Queen's final gift had undeniably stirred something older. A reminder that the royal family is not simply an institution. It is also a collection of individuals whose lives intersect through history, duty, and deeply personal relationships. For Catherine, the gift remained exactly what the Queen had intended, a private message about responsibility and the future. But beyond Windsor's walls, interpretation continued to spread. And as those interpretations moved through the extended network surrounding the royal household, one truth became increasingly clear. The late Queen's quiet gesture had reopened questions that many believed had long ago been settled. Questions about legacy, about influence, and about which figures would ultimately shape the monarchy's next chapter. The palace responds with silence. Inside royal institutions, silence is rarely accidental. It is usually a decision, measured, deliberate, and shaped by centuries of experience. When sensitive matters arise within the royal family, the palace rarely moves quickly to explain or correct every rumor. Instead, it often allows events to settle naturally, trusting that restraint can prevent small tensions from growing into public controversy. That approach became clear almost immediately after whispers about the Queen's final gift to Catherine began circulating through royal circles. By the time fragments of the story reached palace advisors, senior staff already understood how delicate the situation could become. The discovery at Windsor had been entirely private, meant only for Catherine and the few individuals responsible for organizing the late Queen's personal archives. Yet symbolism has always carried weight within royal life. Some observers interpreted the Queen's gesture as a deeply personal expression of trust. Others quietly viewed it as a signal about the monarchy's future. Within Camilla's extended family network, the news had stirred emotions that were understandable, even if they remained carefully contained. Despite this, the palace made no public response. No statement was issued. No clarification was offered. Inside the royal household, this restraint was intentional. Experienced advisors knew that speaking too quickly could unintentionally magnify the story. Even a simple explanation might invite new interpretations about hierarchy or favoritism within the family, so the matter remained private. The Queen's letter and the small keepsake were placed back into secure storage after Catherine had seen them. The Princess of Wales herself requested that the item remain entirely personal, honoring the late Queen's suggestion that it not become part of public royal life. Those close to Catherine later described her reaction as calm and reflective. She had spent more than a decade learning how even the smallest royal detail could attract intense attention. There was no effort on her part to highlight the moment. Instead, she quietly returned to her normal schedule of engagements, meetings, and charitable work. At the same time, Camilla's response was equally measured. Having lived through years of scrutiny during her journey into the royal family, she understood better than most how speculation can expand when emotions become visible. So, she chose not to react publicly. Within both households, the same quiet understanding emerged. The Queen's decision had been made long ago, and whatever personal reasons guided that choice belonged to her alone. With no official comment and no visible conflict, the story gradually began to lose momentum. Inside the palace, silence had once again served its familiar purpose, allowing a private gesture to remain exactly what it was meant to be. What the Queen's gesture truly meant. In the weeks that followed, the story of Queen Elizabeth's final personal gift slowly settled into a quieter perspective. What had initially stirred curiosity, speculation, and emotional reactions within certain royal circles began to reveal a deeper meaning, one that had far less to do with rivalry or hierarchy than many had first assumed. Those who had known the late Queen best often described her leadership style as subtle and deeply intentional. Elizabeth rarely explained her long-term thinking directly. Instead, she preferred quiet gestures that carried meaning for the people closest to her. Over the course of her 70 years on the throne, she had mastered the art of preparing the monarchy for the future without drawing unnecessary attention to the process. And in that context, the gift left to Catherine began to look less like a statement about individuals and more like a reflection of the Queen's understanding of continuity. By the time Catherine joined the royal family, Elizabeth had already seen decades of change within the institution she had spent her life protecting. She had witnessed public scrutiny, generational transitions, and moments when the monarchy's stability appeared uncertain. Through all of that, one principle remained constant in her thinking. The crown must always look forward. Catherine represented part of that future. Over more than a decade inside royal life, she had demonstrated the qualities the Queen valued most: patience, steadiness, and a clear understanding that royal duty was not about personal visibility, but about quiet service. For Elizabeth, that kind of temperament mattered more than titles or status. The private keepsake she left behind was never intended to become a symbol for the public. It was not meant to create comparison between members of the royal family, nor to suggest that one role carried greater importance than another. Instead, it functioned as something far simpler, a personal message, a reminder passed from one generation to the next that the monarchy survives not through spectacle, but through discipline and restraint. For Catherine, the meaning of the gesture remained deeply personal. She did not display the gift publicly or speak about it in interviews. It remained exactly where the Queen had intended it to remain, within the private space of family memory. And perhaps that quiet handling was the clearest reflection of the lesson Elizabeth had tried to leave behind. Because in the end, the Queen's final gesture was never about creating headlines. It was about trust. Trust that the next generation understood the responsibility waiting for them. And trust that the future of the monarchy would continue to be carried forward not with noise, but with the same calm sense of duty that had defined Elizabeth's reign for more than 7 remarkable decades.